Evolution is a whale of a tale. Have scientists finally solved the faint young sun paradox? And another Martian meteorite. This is Genesis Week. Welcome to this episode of Genesis Week, the weekly program of creationary commentary on news, views, and events pertaining to the Origins controversy, made possible by the supporters of Core Ottawa, Citizens for Origins Research and Education, and now carried on the Christianima network, christianima.com, Christian cinema at its finest. A special welcome to our new viewers joining us in the US, as this program is now carried on the Walk TV network. Excellence in pirate broadcasting, we continue to bring you the information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear, and giving glory to the creator while doing it. Remember, if you get lost in cyberspace, you can just punch in wazooloo.com or genesisweek.com and you will find us. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel to get extras like Crevo Rants and full interviews with our guests. I'm your host, Ian Juby. Whale evolution is promoted in our textbooks and evolutionary museums, proponing an alleged fossil sequence showing the change from land animal to whale. Now, according to the evolution myth, fish walked up onto land, growing legs and becoming land animals. Later on, some of those land animals then went back into the oceans and evolved into whales. One of the more famous and oft repeated examples of alleged vestigial organs is the so-called leftover leg bones and hip bones in some whales. I don't know about you, it was pointed out to me in high school and claimed to be evidence of evolution. After all, why would whales have leg bones or hip bones except that they had evolved from land animals? Dr. Jerry Bergman had an excellent article out in the most recent issue of Creation Research Society Quarterly, dealing with the whole topic of whale evolution and its alleged evidence. Now, many evolutionists consider the fossil evidence of whale evolution one of the best examples of evidence for evolution. In short, Bergman put it in no uncertain terms, titling his paper, Whale Evolution, a Whale of a Tale, and writing, "An enormous number of major features separate whales from terrestrial animals, and we have no evidence for transitional forms. Many extinct animals have existed with a wide variety of features that cannot be used to prove anything about evolution. Indeed, many animals that exist right now have a wide variety of features that cannot be used to prove anything about evolution, such as the duck-billed platypus. But let's take a quick look at the alleged fossil evidence for land animal to whale evolution. Now, it looks impressive at first when you see the alleged sequence in the way it is usually presented in textbooks. But the first thing you'll notice that is ignored is the sheer size difference between these organisms. Indohyus was about the size of a small raccoon. Comparing the size of Indohyus to the modern whale Balena, and suggesting that Indohyus evolved into whales, one must ask the question, really? I mean, you need to understand, the tongue of the modern blue whale weighs as much as an elephant. And yet somehow evolution is supposed to produce this enormous size from a creature the size of a small raccoon, while simultaneously reducing the size of the enormous dinosaurs to the size of modern birds. But aside from storytelling, rather than real science, what about the fossil evidence itself? Does it support the idea of land critters evolving into whales? In page after page of detail, Bergman unravels the entire story with science. First, he shows the contradictions the evidence presents. While some evolutionary researchers will point to similarities in the skeletons of whales and the alleged ancestors, the DNA of the whales doesn't match those ancestors, but better matches other creatures that do not share the same skeletal similarities. Now, even those similarities are pretty much insignificant when looking at the big picture. For example, Indohyus is promoted as the whale ancestor primarily because it has a thickened ear bone like the whales. Okay, they have a similar ear bone, which can also be explained within the model of a common designer. The designer of the whales in Indohyus used a similar design in the ear bones of both. What about the thousands of other major differences between Indohyus and the whales? Thousands of changes that are needed to take place, none of which are insignificant. As Bergman put it, radical changes required in the integument system, lactation, breathing, diving, feeding methods, nervous system, eyes, they must be protected underwater, and hearing, and transformation from a walking to a swimming mode of life. Some additional examples include loss of body hair, body streamlining, transformation of forelimbs into flippers, loss of hind limbs, evolution of flukes for swimming, and backward movement of nostrils. Thousands of changes are required to convert a land tetrapod to a fish-like mammal. All of these systems are interrelated and function as a unit, requiring altering the interrelationships of the whole system. Now, at this point, some anti-creationists will get real excited and talk about how I'm arguing from incredulity. Just because I can't believe this story does not mean it isn't possible. Well, except that the science is on my side. Just because you have an imagination wild enough to imagine it does not mean it happened. And guess what? Such radical changes have never been observed in any organism in all of scientific history. I challenge you to find me one. Show me an organism that made radical changes to its heart or reproductive systems and lived to tell about it, and reproduce others with the same changes. Look at the major changes in the reproduction and the heart alone between land animals and whales. Instead of a heart the size of a fist, whales have a heart the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. Whales give live birth and nurse underwater, literally force-feeding a calf 2 to 3 gallons of milk in seconds so that the calf can then come up for air. The whale's lungs are specifically designed for living in the water and allow the whales to stay submerged for an hour or more and able to dive to depths of more than 1,600 feet below the surface. Land animals have to have a kidney system to deal with waste products like ammonia, whereas the whales discharge waste products like that directly into the sea. Thus, evolution must first evolve radical new systems to evolve from fishes to land creatures. Then it must evolve radically new systems again to move back into the oceans, all while not killing itself as it changes its internal organs. But what about those fossils? Bergman goes down the list in page after page of reasons why these creatures are not the evolutionary ancestors of the whales. The Pachycetidids were obviously fully land-dwelling, about the size of a medium-sized dog, and were considered whale ancestors primarily because of their inner ear systems. Not because their ear systems resembled those whales, but rather because they didn't resemble that of other land creatures. Yet Thewison et al. Found that the hearing system was developed for airborne sound, not underwater hearing. Their nostrils were in about the same place as dog nostrils, and their teeth were those of landlubber carnivores. Basically, the creatures are very much like dogs. Basilosaurus, Ambulocetus, Remingtonicididae, and the Archaeocetes are now considered not part of the whale evolution chain, but possibly offshoots which became extinct. Ambulocetus was an otter-sized land-dwelling creature with a long tail. Now, even though it's been referred to as a walking whale, the tail wasn't even remotely whale-like. As whale tails always have flukes, Ambulocetus did not. Further research prompted the discoverer of Ambulocetus, Philip Gingrich, to basically recant its place in the whale sequence. He now believes it to be an offshoot of the whale evolution. Deuterodon atrox is considered to be just an infant of Basilosaurus, which is now considered just an extinct marine creature and not part of the whale evolution. Rhodocetus is almost like a cross between a crocodile and a dolphin. Neither similarity helps the land animal to whale evolution story. Although Rhodocetus is claimed to have a whale-like tail, there is no evidence of this from the fossil record. For example, there should be a ball vertebrae on the tail to which the fluke or tail attached. That ball vertebrae is non-existent. Basically, valid fossil evidence connecting land animals to whales is completely lacking. As Bergman put it, this is true in spite of the fact that over 2 million putative fossil whale bones have been discovered. None of the proposed fossils is a viable transitional fossil, and all are problematic. The best example of a transitional form is the modern-day dolphin, but since they are contemporary with modern whales, they cannot be ancestors of whales. Well, what about those hip bones and leg bones were shown in school and in museums? Clearly evidence of leftover bones from the whale's evolution, isn't it? Nope, not even close. First of all, they are not hip bones. They're floating in the muscle tissue, not connected to the skeleton anywhere. And they have a purpose, and thus are not useless leftovers at all. For example, in some whales like the North Sea beaked whale, only the males have this alleged pelvis. Why? Because it's not a pelvis at all. The bones are anchors for muscles, and in this case, the penis. In other whales, which have similar bones in both males and females, the bones are anchors for the reproductive organs. Hey, this is the reproductive system. If the bones are vestigial and useless, then remove them. All it means is the extinction of the species and the extinction of any evolutionary changes. This is only one problem of many I brought up in Crevo Rant number 13, Ian's sex video. How do you propose to change a hip bone into bones essential to reproduction without causing the extinction of the species? The correct answer is you cannot. It must be designed that way. It's the same story with other whales that have what some evolutionists have interpreted as leftover leg bones. These are not leg bones. They are essential bones anchoring muscles and acting as guides during copulation. Again, essential for reproduction. There is nothing vestigial nor useless about any of these bones, and instead of supporting evolution, they raise fatal questions for the evolution myth. How do you develop these bones or change them from pre-existing bones without causing the extinction of the species, when these bones are essential for the reproductive system? Whales were clearly designed, and design demands a designer. Who is that designer? I say the only possibility is Christ Jesus, who not only said he was the creator, but demonstrated it in power and glory with miracles too numerous to count, and ultimately even rising from the dead to show he was the way, the truth, and the life. You can get more details from Dr. Bergman's in-depth paper in the latest CRSQ. Another paper came out in Science magazine attempting once again to solve the faint young sun paradox. Now, what is this paradox? Well, actually, it's a problem that evolutionary deep time has produced. If the sun was not created, but rather the faith known as the standard solar model was true, then the sun evolved through a series of stages as different types of stars. As a result, our sun is in one of those stages, but it has changed over the past 4.5 billion years that the Earth is alleged to have been around for. Now here's the thing. According to the standard solar model, the sun would have been about 30% colder than it is at present for the first, 2 billion years or so. Now that means the Earth oceans would have been one big skating rink, and we'd have a worldwide ice age. Hockey night in Canada would never be the same. Now there is, however, no geological evidence of such a snowball Earth. In fact, what is claimed to be the oldest fossils in the world are stromatolites, made by blue-green algae in the oceans, and they are alleged to be 3.5 billion years old. Now that's only one of many problems with such speculations of deep time, an old Earth, and the evolution of stars in our sun. The Earth will be a frozen ball of an ice age from the poles right to the equators. And once you start an ice age like that, you can't stop it. because the ice and snow reflects away heat from the sun. Astronomers Carl Sagan and George Mullen first identified this problem, calling it the faint young sun paradox back in 1972. Now notice that this problem is only a problem because of evolutionary theory and deep time. In other words, it is a problem caused by the assumptions of the evolutionary model. Perhaps the answer to the problem is that the sun was never faint because the sun is young, 6,000 years old according to the Bible, and there is no paradox. Now, there's been numerous attempts over the years to try and deal with this alleged problem, calling upon things like extremely high quantities of methane or carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, that's fine and all to suggest, but the problem is that all of this is outside of the realm of science. It is untestable, and radically altering the atmospheric content causes problems all on its own. In fact, Raymond and Pierrehumbert comment on this as they attempted to solve the faint young sun paradox by changing the composition of Earth's atmosphere in the past, raising the quantities of hydrogen in our atmosphere by more than 1,800 times the present levels, as well as doubling or tripling the amount of nitrogen in our air. In other words, essentially, no oxygen. There is also no geological evidence of a time in the past where there was no oxygen in the atmosphere. In fact, if you remove oxygen, that means you've removed ozone, which is a form of oxygen. No ozone defending Earth from ultraviolet light coming in from the sun means the ultraviolet light pours in unhindered, hits the water of Earth's oceans, and breaks it apart into hydrogen and free radical oxygen. Adding to the paradox with another paradox, Raymond and Pierrehumbert acknowledged that such a dense atmosphere would actually affect things like rain. Yet we find fossilized raindrop impressions that, according to deep time, are extremely old and yet show no hindrance to the rainfall whatsoever. In other words, the fossil raindrops indicate the atmosphere was the same density it is today. The bottom line is, these wild, untestable speculations are necessary because of the wild, untestable speculations of deep time and evolution. On the other hand, if the creation account is correct, the Earth and the Sun are only 6,000 years old. There is no need for wild, untestable speculations because there is no paradox. There is no problem. Creation lines up with the evidences just fine. Stop me if you've heard this before. An ancient meteorite hint that there was life on Mars. That's right, it must be time for funding requests at NASA again. A meteorite found in the Sahara Desert, which allegedly came from Mars, contains a whole pile of water. No, they didn't find life, but it seems every time that there's talk of water elsewhere in the solar system or universe, suddenly the possibility of life gets thrown into the mix real quick like. But that, of course, is not the only speculation. The basaltic rock is very different from other alleged rocks from Mars. Now, please notice they didn't find these rocks on Mars and bring them back here to Earth. They found these rocks on Earth. So how do we know these rocks came from Mars? Well, there's 5 senses, so you get 5 choices. We know it came from Mars because it looks like it came from Mars. It sounds like it came from Mars. It tastes like it came from Mars. It feels like it came from Mars. Or it smells like it came from Mars. According to the researcher Dr. A.G., talking with the Toronto Star, even though most space rocks become blackened on the outside during their blazing descent through the Earth's atmosphere, they often remain light on the inside. The meteorite NWA 7034, on the other hand, was dark all the way through, earning the nickname Black Beauty. I had never seen anything like it, A.G. said. So we know the correct answer is not A, it looks like it came from Mars. As the Toronto Star also reported, at first NWA 7034 appeared to be very un-Mars-like. Laser fluorination revealed that its ratio of heavier to lighter oxygen isotopes, usually a handy fingerprint of a meteorite's origins, didn't match any of the Mars meteorites described in the scientific literature. So therefore we know that the correct answer is not B, it smells like it came from Mars. But wait, the Star report went on to explain the clincher. The meteorite had too much iron to come from Mercury, and it had too many traces of water to have come from Venus. But when they analyzed minerals, called pyroxenes, they found that the ratio of iron to manganese did match those of other Martian meteorites. So the correct answer is C, we know the rock came from Mars because it tastes like it came from Mars. Now, of course, this brings up the interesting question of, just because it tastes like the other meteorites that came from Mars, how do we know the other meteorites found were from Mars? Well, if you dig into the original papers on those rocks, you find out that their Martian origin was determined by their gas content. So therefore, they know they came from Mars because they smell like they came from Mars. Now, the thing is, these rocks may very well have come from Mars. I have no problem with that. But what's interesting is that these meteorites are composed of materials commonly found on Earth and on the Moon. And there's a huge search for life on other planets, in particular Mars. So we hear this excitement every time we find water somewhere else. So if we did find life on Mars, like bacteria, in the end, this would have nothing to do with evolution. Leading evolutionary authorities have admitted they have no explanation for how life could arise from non-life. So if we were to find life on Mars, the most likely explanation would be that the life came from Earth, because that's where we find life. It would be impossible times 2 for a life to arise from non-life on Earth and Mars. And finding water in a rock allegedly from Mars that was found here on Earth, in the Sahara Desert, does not even hint at life on Mars, in spite of headlines saying such. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this meteorite isn't from Mars. I can accept that. I am saying, let's take a look at the subtle assumptions behind the interpretations and excitement of the search for life on other planets. Even though that search is conducted in hopes of verifying evolution, what it does, in fact, is simply cause more problems for evolution. It multiplies the impossibility of the origin of that first life and multiplies the demand for a first living being who is outside of the laws of nature to create the first life. It demands God, a creator, an intelligent designer. Hang tight, we'll be right back after this short break.
This program sponsored in part by Genesis Park, found at genesispark.com, where we say dinosaurs are living evidence of a powerful creator. And by you, our financial supporters. What does the Bible say about aliens? Is there life on other planets? What can science tell us about the possibility of aliens? Ian Juby gives answers to these and many more questions in this fascinating and highly disturbing subject. Looking analytically at the subject, complete with the testimonies of people who claim to have been abducted by aliens. The answers will probably surprise you. In this 1.5-hour lecture, Ian shows that the alleged aliens are a problem and that Jesus is the solution. Order online today at Ian's bookstore.
Mail for me?
I forget. I'm supposed to cut the blue wire or the red wire? Or I could just pull the detonator.
I had two skeptics take issue with my tagline at the beginning of the show, referring to information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear. YouTuber Orge121 wrote in, I have an issue with your catchphrase, bring the information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear. Your sources are all public and open for people to look up and see. You do not bring information, instead you put your own analysis on top of it, more of a pundit. And YouTuber LithidMan also took issue with this, mentioning it in his video response to episode 15, except apparently he understood anti-creationists to include microbiologists and the like. Now let me be clear again. The anti-creationists are a very specific crowd, of which, sure, there might be microbiologists and the like, but being a microbiologist does not make one an anti-creationist. In fact, being an evolutionist does not make you an anti-creationist. The anti-creationists are the religious zealots of evolutionism. Such people most certainly are trying to keep information out of the hands of the populace at large. For example, I cited from the Creation Research Society Quarterly. Now, I hear what Lithotidman is saying in that he is not trying to hide information from anyone, and I believe him. The same goes for Orge. But the anti-creationists will get real excited because I cited a creationary peer-reviewed journal, and they will criticize the journal and the author of the paper. They will say it is not a peer-reviewed journal, Dr. Bergman doesn't have a degree, yada yada. Yes, it most certainly is a peer-reviewed journal, and Dr. Bergman has some 9 degrees. I think you would both agree that that has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not the content of the article is correct or not. Would you not agree? And so the anti-creationists flinging out such canards is most certainly trying to keep others from hearing information. I'm very careful with my use of the term anti-creationist, which does not include your average evolutionist, and I really don't think includes Lithotidman or Orge, because most evolutionists that I know of like science and like information. They want to know the truth. The anti-creationists do not. Lithotidman also pointed out an error I made in the same episode 15. Alright, I have so much to say about this video, I just might have to do a video reply. But here in comments, you cite Davalos et al. 2012 as saying that bat and cetacean sonar have identical gene sequences. I read the paper, no such thing at all in that. They do cite Liu et al. 2010 that states that there is a similarity in the Preston gene between bats and cetaceans. But all tetrapods have this gene, and the Liu paper only shows a gross similarity. Yes, actually what happened was I just plain missed a slide in editing, and thus I missed a reference, which was referred to in the reference I provided in the description. The missing reference is Lee et al. In Current Biology. Okay, I gotta run. I'm your host, Ian Juby. Thank you for watching, and please join me again next Genesis Week, as we'll have geneticist Dr. Kevin Anderson on the show. Now remember, if you're watching the show via YouTube, you can share this show with your friends on TwitFace+ using the convenient share button down below. You can also send us your comments, questions, and letter bombs to us via email, Twitter, or leaving a comment on the most recent show on our YouTube channel at genesisweek.com. Remember those words of our Creator, Lord and Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. We'll see you next week.
We need your support to help keep this program on the air. You can help by making a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, K2K 2P4. You can also sign up for Ian's newsletter detailing current research and news items at ianjuby.org.